Welcome to the ID Den podcast, the show for teachers ready to step outside the classroom and into their next chapter. I'm your host, Charity Bosch, and I know firsthand how overwhelming it can feel to leave teaching behind. Whether you're exploring instructional design, navigating corporate culture, or just figuring out your first steps, this show is your roadmap. Each episode will tackle the real challenges, share practical strategies, and prove that your teaching skills are exactly what the world needs, just in a different setting. Let's turn that classroom expertise into your career advantage. In today's episode, I would like to talk to you about teaching versus instructional design, what the key differences are. Why does this even matter? Well, it matters to understand the differences because this helps prevent culture shock when you pick up those side jobs or transition into corporate world. This also helps set realistic expectations for you so that you don't think you can just jump straight into it without any sort of preparation or skill building, anything like that. Teaching does transfer very nicely into instructional design, but there are still things that you're going to need to learn, and you need to know what to prepare for mentally so that you aren't surprised by things like I was when I first left the classroom and entered corporate world with instructional design. So let's dive in. The first difference that I want to discuss are your learners. With teaching, you have usually, not everyone obviously in any setting, but usually a captive audience. Students look up to their teachers. They want to learn from them in most situations with most students, and their attendance is mandatory. They have to go to school. With instructional design, you usually have more voluntary participants, but they are busy adults. A lot of times you are designing learning that is mandatory in a way because it relates to their job or their organization or compliance, but for the most part, adults want to learn, they know they need to get it done, and there's a little bit of that voluntary side in that piece. The motivation factors are completely different. With students, at least I remember very vividly, you struggled sometimes to create intrinsic motivation. Sometimes there's just things that they're not interested in. They don't care to learn it. And so you're having to create extrinsic motivation to help make sure that they're learning, that it's transferring, that they're participating, that they're engaged, all of that. With adult learners, a lot of times they already have intrinsic motivation and you have to motivate them less. That's not to say that you don't have to motivate them at all, especially with those more mandatory compliance-based courses. But the motivation factors are completely different. It's a lot easier to get an adult on board. Sometimes it's just, you got to do this, just get it done. And adults have an easier time with that than kids do. And your engagement strategies are going to have to adapt because your audience is different, because their motivation factors are different, because it's just a little bit different. There's a lot of things that still work with adults that you've been using with kids, but you do have to make a shift mentally because adults can very easily get turned off if they feel like they're being treated like children. And so some things definitely work that I used with my third grade students, used the same sort of things with adult learners. You just have to approach it a little bit differently to make sure that they aren't catching on that this is something that you've used with kids. The next difference I want to talk about is time and pacing. So with teaching, you have real-time delivery and feedback. You are in front of the class, you are delivering the lessons, you're getting that feedback, you're picking up in the moment and able to shift your focus, your strategies, your lesson in the moment. In instructional design, oftentimes you're the designer, not the deliverer. You're not the instructor. So you're going to create it once, use it over and over again, and you're not the one delivering. So you're not getting the immediate learner interaction. You're not getting that real-time feedback. You're having to wait to make changes to what you're creating based on the instructors that actually do the delivery, if it's instructor-led, of course, to give you the feedback to then inform your decisions and your changes. You're not making changes on the fly. You're waiting for it to be delivered and then coming back. Now, we like to do beta testing with instructional design, so you can do some of that. Typically, when you beta test, you do deliver the course. But after that, once it's launched into the world, you're not usually the one delivering the course. So you're not having that immediate learner interaction. If it's an e-learning course in particular, That's being delivered via computer anytime, anywhere to your learners. And so you're also not getting that immediate real-time feedback. You're having to wait to see if they even give you feedback and if the feedback that they give you is even meaningful, which sometimes can be a struggle when it comes to e-learning. So as an instructional designer, you're going to have to learn to anticipate a lot. You're going to have to anticipate questions that might come up. You're going to have to anticipate problems that might happen. You're going to have to do all of that anticipation in advance. And again, this is where beta testing comes in handy because you can learn some of these questions and problems through that, but beta tests don't cover everything. After something's launched, you're still going to have some questions that arise, some problems that arise, and you're going to have to learn to anticipate those things because the timing and the pacing, you're not delivering it most likely if it's instructor-led. You're definitely not delivering it if it's e-learning. And so you're not going to get that real-time feedback. You're going to have to learn to anticipate and to really put yourself in your learner's shoes so that you can identify some of those things that are going to happen before they even happen, and then build in the measures to either prevent or mitigate those things when they do happen. Third difference I want to talk about is subject matter expertise. In teaching, you are the content expert. If you're a third grade teacher, you are the expert of third grade curriculum and content. That is not how it goes in instructional design. In instructional design, you're the learning expert working with subject matter experts. My very first job was for a utility trade school. I had never been a line worker. I am not a content expert in that. I'm the learning expert. I know instructional design. I know adult learning. I know all of those things. I was not the content matter, the subject matter expert in line work. So you're going to have to develop a collaborative process and experience working with those subject matter experts. And that can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge because you're used to being it all. You are the content expert. It's different in instructional design. You have to figure out how to extract knowledge from those subject matter experts instead of holding the knowledge yourself. And then you have to translate that expert level content for your audience, for your learners who are typically novices, especially in comparison with your subject matter experts. So you are going to have to get used to working with other people. You're going to have to get used to really drawing out the information that you need. We call it the burden of knowledge. Those SMEs have a burden of knowledge. They're up here at the top when it comes to knowledge. Your learners are down here at the bottom when it comes to knowledge. So you have to bridge that gap between their burden of knowledge, their expertise, and what your learners need to get from that. Fourth difference I want to talk about is feedback and iteration. In teaching, you're getting that instant feedback from your students' faces, their body language, how glossy their eyes look. You're getting immediate feedback as you deliver the lesson, and you can iterate on the fly. In instructional design, you're getting delayed feedback through instructor feedback, through data, through surveys. And so it's harder to know what's working immediately. And so you're going to have to wait to iterate and make those changes until after you get that data and you get that information. Your revision cycles are going to happen less frequently in instructional design because of that. So your revision cycles for lessons in the classroom happen immediately. You're going through multiple revision cycles. I remember teaching a lesson and we dive in and I'm like, this is not going how I thought it would be. I got to change it up. Then I revise. And then, okay, this is a little bit better, but it's still not quite hitting the mark. These kids still have glazed over looks on their face. I got to revise again. Sometimes you're revising 2, 3, 4, 5 times within that hour that you're delivering the lesson. Whereas in instructional design, those revision cycles happen a lot less frequently. I've worked for organizations that hadn't touched things in years. And so that's a big shift because coming from being a teacher, you want to constantly improve, you want to constantly iterate and make things better, but that's just not the reality of what it's like in instructional design, especially in the corporate world. The fifth difference is autonomy and decision-making. In teaching, you are the significant classroom authority. You have the autonomy within your classroom to make the decisions, to change on the fly, to pivot. You're doing the lesson plan. You're doing everything, right? You're a teacher. You know how that goes. You're doing everything. Whereas in instructional design, it's a more collaborative process. You're working with stakeholders, you're working with subject matter experts, you're working with colleagues. You're not by yourself. In teaching, you have peer learning communities, you have your grade level teams. So there's that collaborative nature, but teaching collaboration is very different than instructional design collaboration. In instructional design, it's way more collaborative than even teaching. And I know my third grade team, we were lock and step. We were constantly meeting, we were constantly discussing at lunch, in the hallway, in between, at recess. Obviously, during our scheduled grade level meetings, we would take full days outside of the classroom to plan together and to create lessons together and assessments together, all those things. We were very collaborative. And even that was nothing compared to when I started my instructional design job. It was like really collaborative, constantly talking to colleagues, to my manager, to stakeholders, to subject matter experts, to project managers. All sorts of people are involved in a project. It's not just you, which is also kind of nice because at the end of the day, it's not just you. You aren't the only one being held to the outcome of whatever project you're working on. There's a whole team that is together on this and held to the outcome together. And so that part is a little bit nice because you aren't an island. In instructional design, you have more approvals and sign-offs that are required. You have more eyes on things. It's not just you're planning a lesson and delivering it and then moving on, like in teaching. You're designing something, you're having it reviewed and approved, and then you're creating, and then you're having it reviewed and approved and tested, and then you're revising and you're having it approved and signed off. And there's a lot more that goes into it than just create the thing and go. You also then have to balance multiple opinions and priorities. And I have worked with plenty subject matter experts, SMEs, that have very strong opinions. And sometimes their strong opinions go out of their lane and into mine. And then I'm having to balance, okay, they are able to give their opinion. At the end of the day, I'm the learning expert and I get the final say. But you still want to make sure that you're taking into account those opinions and at least making sure that they feel heard and that you've communicated, that's great, I'm not going to do that. Here's why. As the learning expert, let me help educate you. So there is a little bit more there. It's not the same sort of justification I would say I felt as a teacher having to justify that I was good. It's more helping educate and inform other people on your expertise. The sixth difference is scope and scale. So with teaching, you're teaching 20 to 30, 34, 35. I know some of my classes were 32 students at a time, and you're with them for the whole school year. And you have more of that smaller cohort feel, even though I know classrooms can feel very large, but you're with them for a very extended period of time, and that's all you're focused on. With instructional design, you're potentially touching hundreds and thousands of learners in a very small time frame. If you're working for an organization that is huge, let's say Amazon, right? You are hundreds of thousands of people are going to take your courses and whenever it gets launched, And so it is a lot different of a scale that you are going to be designing things. One mistake is going to affect way more people in instructional design than it does in your classroom. So there is a little bit more higher stakes for getting it right. And then the scope of the work that you're doing, in some ways, I would say it's smaller than teaching because you're teaching multiple lessons in one day. And you might work on one course in instructional design for 3 months, maybe even longer, sometimes shorter. And so there's a little bit of a difference in the scope, but what you're building with instructional design, the scope is usually more grander because the course is going to be bigger than just your lessons that you're teaching throughout the day. So there's some similarities, some differences. There's a bit of a balance. I wouldn't say one is worse than the other, but you're definitely impacting more people in a smaller time frame than you do as a teacher. And your scope is a little bit different as far as the work you do. The seventh difference is the tools and technology. With teaching, you're familiar with classroom tools, more basic technology. With instructional design, you learn new things all the time. You're constantly learning new software. You're constantly having to pivot and change and, this rolled out and there's an update to this software that you've been using. Technology changes very rapidly, and I don't feel like that hit the classroom as hard as it does in instructional design. You have more technical troubleshooting that you have to do. There's a whole suite of tools that I use as an instructional designer when I'm building courses, whether that's e-learning or whether that's instructor led. And there's a lot more opportunities for technical issues to arise. Not that you're not familiar with that as a teacher. Believe me, you are, who's had their PowerPoint and their flashy TV screen or projector go out during the middle of an observation, and you've got to figure it out on the fly and pivot and troubleshoot all of that. I'm not saying you don't do that already, but there are more technical troubleshooting issues that arise with the levels and the number of software that you're going to be using as an instructional designer. And then the last difference that I want to talk about, difference number 8, is how you measure success. In teaching, oftentimes we are going to measure success based off of, unfortunately, and to which I very disagree with, test scores. You're also going to be looking at success based on the behavioral challenges and your classroom management abilities. Those are the common ways, if you think about performance observations and if you think about those stupid state standardized tests, that's typically how teachers' success is measured. Whereas in instructional design, it's a little bit different. I definitely feel less anxious about my performance being measured as an instructional designer than I did as a teacher. It feels a lot less high stakes. A lot of times, your metrics are going to be tracked based on like completion rates of courses, different performance metrics. But if you're a good instructional designer, you're also going to be looked at for how you impact the business. So it's something I'm very passionate about in instructional design is courses should always be somehow impacting the business. So like completion rates is great. We had 100% of our learners complete it in the first 2 weeks. Woohoo! But there's no point in that if nothing is changing in the business. Instead, you want to make sure that you're tying learning to specific business metrics that are being tracked to say, hey, after this help desk course was rolled out, IT saw a 15% decrease in tickets coming in within the first month. Like things like that are going to be able to speak more highly to your abilities and your performance than just the typical learning development completion rates, how many learners pass the test on the first try type of things. If you can tie it to those business metrics, you're going to be able to make a much better case for your value. You're also going to have more data-driven decision making. So you're going to be looking at a lot of data, analyzing it, figuring out what needs to happen based on that data. And you are going to be focused a lot on ROI, return on investment, and that business impact. You want to make sure that you're showing your stakeholders, your organization leaders, that what you are doing is important and it's impacting the business in a meaningful way, which then shows your value and is a way that you can show your success. So we've talked about a lot of differences. Let's talk about what stays the same. At the end of the day, the core mission of a teacher and an instructional designer is the same. Teachers and instructional designers just want to help people learn. The people are what change. Looks a little bit different when you're a teacher versus an instructional designer. But at the end of the day, you want the same thing. You want to make sure that you're helping people learn. Another huge skill that teachers have that are also very highly necessary in instructional design is problem solving. When things don't work, teachers are excellent problem solvers. Same thing in instructional designers. You're constantly having to problem solve. When technology doesn't work, when an e-learning isn't hitting and affecting the change that you need, analyzing business problems from the jump. You're always problem solving. That's not something that's going to change. Your creativity is not going to change. That's one of the things that I loved is I hated the bureaucracy and the politics within the public school system that I worked for. But I loved the creativity that I had as a classroom teacher. When I moved into instructional design and left the classroom, I was so glad that that creativity not only still exists, but it's even magnified. You get to be even more creative than you were when you were a teacher. And that is not something that changes. Then I think the very most important thing that's not going to change is your empathy for struggling learners. In the classroom, you will have those gate kids, those very advanced kids that you're mostly just trying to keep out of trouble, let's be honest, because you have so many other students that you need to address their struggles and where they're at. You've got your bubble kids, you've got your low performers. Those gate kids, you're trying to make sure that you're keeping them engaged and challenging them, keeping them out of trouble. With adults, doesn't change. You're still going to have learners as adults that struggle. And that empathy for those struggling learners is not something that goes away. It's something that becomes even stronger, especially because having struggling students who are kids is very different than having struggling students who are adults. And if anything, I would say the empathy grows, especially because you can relate more being an adult yourself. So, some mindset shifts that you're going to need to make in order to handle these differences with grace is the mindset shift from performer to behind the scenes creator. On one hand, I was so relieved to get to just do the creating and not have to do the delivering. On the other hand, it was very weird. It was something that I had to deal with going from lesson planning, using curriculum to deliver courses and lessons and content to my students to creating but not delivering. At first, it was like, whew, nice. I don't have to stand up in front of anyone. And then after a while, it was like, man, like I'm not getting the same feedback. It's super delayed, all of those things. Beta testing and having to train instructors when you have an instructor-led course kind of helps bring some of that back. So it's a balance of like, oh, cool, I don't have to actually deliver this thing, but also I'm going to be beta testing it. So I'll have to deliver that piece. And I have to make sure that the instructors that are going to deliver this course that I am creating can be successful. And so basically you're teaching them. And so there is those components still, but that's a big mindset shift is you are no longer the performer, the deliverer, the instructor. You are the behind the scenes creator. Another shift you're going to have to make is immediate to delayed gratification. You're not getting the immediate feedback. You're not getting things in the moment. You're having to wait for people to take things, to get surveys back, to get instructor feedback back, all those things. So it's more of a delayed gratification than creating something, delivering it, immediately getting that gratification, immediately getting that feedback, to creating something, handing it off, waiting for it to be delivered, waiting for the feedback to come in, and then you have that. So that is another shift. Another one is content expert to learning facilitator. You are no longer going to be the expert, the subject matter. You are going to be the learning expert and the learning facilitator. And then finally, a mindset shift is from individual to team player. And again, I know that teachers are team players. You have grade level teams, you have subject teams, you have those things. But I will tell you from experience, having been a teacher and an instructional designer, it is incredibly different to go from teaching to a team in a corporate environment or a higher education environment. In comparison, teachers are very much individuals. You have the onus over your class, even though you might collaborate with your peers and your colleagues. In the corporate world, it's not just your onus anymore, it's your whole team's onus. So you really have to make sure that you're a team player, that you can handle working with people that you might not get along with very well, that you might not agree with very much, and making those changes. Make sure that you are subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this podcast with your teacher friends who are also considering a change. And connect with me on Instagram at the ID Den. Different doesn't mean harder or worse. It just means that you need to be prepared for the shift. And a lot of times the shift is very exciting, but if you're not prepared for it, it can come with a little bit of a shock. So hopefully this episode helped you understand some of those key differences so that you can be prepared for that shift and get excited about it.